On November 18, 1978, in a remote agricultural settlement in Guyana known as Jonestown, more than 900 members of the People's Temple died in a single day. Many ingested a cyanide-laced drink. Others were forced. It remains one of the largest mass deaths of American civilians in modern history. But this was not a sudden collapse. It was the final stage of a system that had been built slowly, step by step, over years. Jim Jones did not begin with poison. He began with a promise, a community without racism, shared resources, collective care, a place where no one would be abandoned. For many, it sounded practical, even hopeful. A church that functioned like a small, self-sustaining state. Order, equality, protection. At the beginning, nothing about People's Temple felt extreme. It felt safe. At the beginning, nothing about People's Temple felt extreme. It felt organized. People arrived carrying ordinary disappointments, jobs that promised dignity and delivered fatigue, institutions that spoke about justice but moved slowly, selectively, a society that felt loud, fragmented, difficult to trust. Jim Jones offered something quieter. Meetings started on time. Roles were clear, tasks were assigned, needs were noticed early, sometimes before they were spoken aloud. Meals were shared, problems were redistributed, life began to feel legible again. Jones spoke in complete sentences about a broken world. His language carried no hesitation. Inequality was not framed as tragedy or fate, but as a solvable error in design. Something that could be fixed if the system was built correctly. Community, he said, was a technology. If everyone followed the same rules, fairness would emerge automatically. Belonging was not emotional, it was procedural. Show up, contribute, stay aligned. For many, this was the first environment where attention felt consistent rather than conditional. Someone noticed if you were tired. Someone corrected you if you drifted. Someone else carried decisions you no longer trusted yourself to make. Relief can feel like clarity when you've lived without either. Importantly, Jones did not demand blind faith. He demanded participation. Members were encouraged to speak, to confess doubts, to critique outsiders. These acts were framed as proof of freedom. The system did not silence questions, it absorbed them, then returned them with cleaner edges, safer conclusions. From the inside, this felt like safety. From the outside, it would later be called control, but at this stage, there was no visible boundary between the two. The structure rewarded alignment with tangible benefits. Housing, food, purpose, proximity to meaning, moral certainty replaced personal ambiguity. Complexity was not denied, it was reassigned. And for people exhausted by choice, that reassignment felt like care. Control inside People's Temple was not imposed all at once. It was assembled carefully, incrementally, like scaffolding rising around belief. Each element, language, reward, fear, isolation, authority, appeared reasonable on its own. The danger was not in any single piece. It was in how they locked together. Language came first, because language determines what can be thought without effort. Jim Jones did not rely on mystical imagery. He favored administrative speech, words like duty, protection, planning, discipline. Emotional complexity was flattened into functional categories. In one recorded meeting, a member questioned a directive. Jones did not respond with anger. He expressed concern. He asked the group to help the person work through their confusion. This is the pivot. The question itself was not punished, but disagreement was translated into malfunction. Once doubt is framed as illness, correction becomes care. Over time, members learned to pre-edit their own thoughts. Questions weren't suppressed. They were reformulated until they aligned. From the inside, this felt like mental clarity. From the outside, it looked like narrowing. Incentives followed language. People's Temple provided real resources: housing, meals, medical care, child care, employment pathways. These were not symbolic rewards, they were survival. Access increased with loyalty. Criticism quietly reduced it. There was no posted rulebook, only patterns. Members learned quickly which behaviors produced stability: those who volunteered more hours, who accepted correction publicly, who demonstrated ideological reliability, were given better assignments, safer roles, closer proximity to leadership. No announcement connected cause and effect. The system didn't need to. When survival is involved, people learn fast. Dependency was reframed as solidarity. Accepting help became evidence of maturity. Refusing it looked selfish. What felt like care functioned as leverage. Fear entered gradually and usually from outside. Jones rarely positioned himself as the threat. He narrated a hostile world, government agencies, racist institutions, defectors framed as infiltrators. "They are watching us," he would say, without specifics. Vagueness kept fear adaptable. Importantly, fear was paired with reassurance. Jones would describe danger, then emphasize preparedness. Meetings, drills, emergency rehearsals. From the inside, these felt empowering. From the outside, they read as conditioning. Fear did not paralyze the group. It mobilized it. Isolation followed, first cognitive, then physical. Members were encouraged to distance themselves from skeptical family, not through force, through narrative. Outsiders could not understand. They were trapped in old thinking. They might unintentionally endanger the movement. Then came small administrative acts, passports collected for safekeeping, letters monitored for security, news filtered to prevent misinformation. No drama, no confrontation, but exit quietly transformed from a right into a logistical problem. Authority was framed not as dominance, but as burden. Jones spoke often about exhaustion, about sacrifice, about responsibility. Authority presented as suffering is difficult to challenge without appearing cruel. When criticized, Jones listed the weight he carried. Dissent was recast as added strain. "Do you want this responsibility?" he would ask. Silence followed. Authority was justified not by power but by necessity. Internal justification completed the structure. Members had invested time, labor, public loyalty, family. To question the system now would require reinterpreting their own lives as mistakes. So belief defended itself. Members explained the system to newcomers, corrected each other's language, enforced norms. Control no longer needed constant direction. The group did it. From the inside, this felt like commitment. From the outside, it functioned as enclosure. The point of no return in Jonestown was not a date. It was not a single decision. It was a psychological threshold. Crossed quietly. Nothing visibly changed. What changed was how alternatives were processed. Language shifted. Earlier rhetoric emphasized progress. Later, language narrowed. There is no going back. History has already chosen. These statements were delivered not as commands but as observations. They drew little reaction. When language stops inviting response, it stops feeling optional. Leaving was no longer framed as betrayal. It was framed as impossibility. People argue with accusations. They rarely argue with inevitability. Incentives inverted. The system no longer promised improvement. It promised continuity. Maintaining access to food, rest, and relative safety required visible alignment. Members volunteered for exhausting roles, not for recognition, but to remain necessary. From the inside, this felt like solidarity. From the outside, it was conditional survival. Fear turned inward. External enemies remained part of the story, but fear increasingly focused on fracture. Dissent itself was framed as danger. Disunity as catastrophe. Preparedness drills normalized extreme scenarios, not as threats, as routines. Fear no longer produced panic, it produced discipline. Isolation deepened. Memories of life before the temple began to feel distant. Morally compromised. Unreal. When the past becomes suspect, the present gains monopoly on meaning. Authority no longer felt chosen. Decisions were framed as responses to crisis, emergency measures. Jones would outline only one viable option, then ask for a vote. The votes were unanimous, not because alternatives were forbidden, but because none were emotionally accessible. Internal justification sealed the threshold. Leaving would require reconstructing the self. When staying feels dangerous but leaving feels unthinkable, belief has completed its transformation. Jonestown did not develop in isolation. It was stabilized indirectly by a surrounding system that failed to recognize what it was seeing. This failure was not malicious. It was categorical. Outside language misclassified the threat. People's Temple was labeled a church, an activist movement. These categories carry assumptions. Religious groups are expected to be intense. Activist movements are expected to be disciplined. Neither suggests psychological enclosure. Concerns were dismissed with the phrase voluntary participation. Once belief is defined as voluntary, its constraints disappear from view. Incentives for intervention were weak. Jones had political allies, delivered votes, framed criticism as persecution. Investigating carried risk. Complaints from defectors were logged, then deprioritized, countered by calm, organized rebuttals. Institutions respond to polish, not pattern. Fear constrained oversight. Authorities feared overreach, public backlash, historical repetition. Ambiguity was tolerated longer than it should have been. Isolation was misread as autonomy. Jonestown's remoteness was framed as self-sufficiency, a communal experiment. Performances during visits were convincing, statements consistent, dissent contextualized. Observers saw what the system was built to show. Authority was mistaken for charisma. Jones was analyzed as a personality, not as a mechanism. By focusing on the man, the structure was missed. Some outsiders repeated temple language, defended it publicly, justification spread. By the time warning signs aligned, the system was already closed. Closed systems do not respond well to late attention. The human cost of Jonestown is often summarized numerically. That accounting misses what was lost earlier. Agency, language collapsed. I want became we must. Identity fused with collective logic. From the inside, this felt like unity. From the outside, it was erasure. Incentives prevented loss, not growth. Compliance avoided scrutiny. Silence preserved stability. Members began policing themselves, confessing small faults early, monitoring tone, adjusting language. Fear detached from specific threats and attached to meaning itself. Life outside felt empty, incoherent. When fear attaches to meaning, evidence loses leverage. Authority functioned like gravity. Decisions felt inevitable. Silence replaced dissent, not agreement. Exhaustion. Belief became self-preservation. To admit error threatened collapse. People did not stop caring. They stopped choosing. Jonestown is often framed as an anomaly, a place, a man, a moment. That framing is comforting. It implies distance, but the mechanisms were not rare. They were structural. Belief becomes dangerous when it is enclosed, when care is conditional, when dissent is reframed as confusion. When authority presents itself as necessity, such systems begin by offering relief. They simplify, they promise coherence. Over time, they narrow what feels possible. Most compliance is voluntary in form long after it stops being voluntary in substance. These systems do not recruit weakness. They recruit people seeking order. The echo is not historical. It is architectural. And because it rarely announces its completion, it is usually recognized only afterward, when belief has already redrawn the boundaries of choice.